They were all vetted by the CCP as red talent. The regime sponsored their studies. They all wore the same suits, coats, shoes, and carried identical briefcases.
This new brand of Chinese students, they were taught to hate America. We absolutely do not know who is doing what and who's real spy, who's not.
The consensus is that the United States has taken another step towards a Cold War-style relationship. This is about full-spectrum disengagement and competition. Welcome to China Watch with the Epoch Times. I'm your host, Terri Wu. Breakups. They can get ugly sometimes. Really ugly. With that in mind, the U.S. China decoupling is getting personal. For those who haven't read it already, see if you can guess which government official posted this. Quote, the U.S. will begin revoking visas of Chinese students, including those with connections to the Chinese Communist Party or studying in critical fields, unquote. That's from Secretary of State Marco Rubio on X on May 28th. My first reaction was that the whole confrontation, breakup, decoupling, whatever you want to call it, is no longer just about business. It's personal. With this step, the U.S. has moved one step closer to classifying the Chinese regime as an enemy. That's because, as Rubio said, having a connection to the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, will be grounds for taking away student visas. The nature of the U.S. China conflict is going through another major shift. To me, this is way bigger than tariffs. It's so big that tariffs are basically a red herring in the news. Everyone is missing the forest for the trees in this escalating conflict. These are big steps. This could even be the prelude to Cold War II. Might we see something on par with the recurrence of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882? That's when Chinese people were banned from immigrating to the United States. Another way to look at the changing dynamic is, before, the United States always looked at the CCP in the light of asking, what have you done to me? But now that's changed to, who are you? It's no longer about past infractions. The Trump administration is understanding the fundamental nature of the CCP, and that will inevitably lead to the question, what will you do to me? And I have to clarify, it's not about who China is. It's about who the CCP is. The Trump administration, during the final months of its first term, began differentiating China the country, CCP the party, and Chinese the people. It's not racial, it's political. But nevertheless, Chinese people would inevitably bear some of the consequences of this new visa policy. That's why Rubio's statement is also personal to me. I came to the States as a Chinese student. Knowing that the same path is going to close for others in the foreseeable future is, well, while I know the obvious security reasons for it, I can't help but feel a degree of sorrow for the chance many others are losing that I once had. The shock of seeing the X post is still with me today as I record this episode on June 1st. Well, who has ever said breakups are happy? Later, you will hear from experts, one of whom actually helped me pinpoint my emotional reaction to this news. For those who have Chinese friends or work with Chinese colleagues, you know what I'm talking about. The Chinese mind is anything but simple. So come with me to explore the complex relationship between the United States and China, and by extension, the people of the two countries. I promise everything will come full circle in the end. I just mentioned the feeling I had at the lost chance of Chinese people coming to be Americans. So first, I would like to share a touching story from Professor John Owen. It embodies the reason why I feel this way.
About a year and a half ago, I've been teaching at the University of Virginia for a long time, since 1997, and I've had many students from various countries, and over the years, many Chinese students. About a year and a half ago, someone knocked on my door at UVA, and it was a young, I'll say young, I would say in her 30s, Asian woman whom I didn't recognize. And she said, Professor Owen, you don't remember me, but I had a class from you, I don't know, 15 years ago. It was a seminar. And she said, and the Tiananmen Square incident of 1989 came up in discussion. And this is what she said. I thought that I said it was a political event, nothing but political. But you, Professor Owen, said it was also a moral event. And she said, ever since, and I was very bothered by what you said, but over the ensuing years, I have come to agree with you. And I have thought many times about that class session, and I wanted to thank you for many years. I am living in the United States, but I live on the West Coast, but I'm in Virginia. And so I really wanted to stop by. And when I saw that you were still here, I was happy, and I wanted to stop by and thank you. And so I, of course, was astonished at this, that she would remember, that she was so affected. It does sound like a true story, so I don't doubt it.
I don't doubt this either. It rings true based on my personal experience and the experience of some of my friends. Before I came to the States, people thought I would be happy in America because of Pizza Hut and Kentucky Fried Chicken. I loved them during my college years in Beijing. And as a quick aside, for those of you who haven't traveled to China, those two restaurants are much fancier over there. But after I arrived, I realized that America had something much more precious to offer: the freedom to make my own choices and decisions for my life. Choices that I never knew were mine.
I've taken away from that story that this is one of the aims that I have when I teach any student from whatever country, to get the student to rethink his or her categories, interpretations, including especially about political events, because I'm a political scientist. And in particular, when I teach students from authoritarian countries, I want them, they don't have to agree with me or become lovers of the United States or agree with everything America does, but I do want them to value the way we probe in democratic countries, in our universities. We probe conventional wisdom, we test ideas, we challenge each other, and we really want answers that are logical and follow the evidence rather than politically acceptable answers. And I think this former student really absorbed that. If in fact the United States is not going to take Chinese students anymore, or not going to take very many, I really think that's in the long term very bad for the world. Because had we not taken that Chinese student, she would never have changed her views of the Tiananmen Square massacre. And you can multiply that by many hundreds of thousands of people.
We just heard from an American professor about Chinese students in the United States. What do Chinese experts think about students here? And what are their personal experiences? That's next. You're listening to China Watch. Follow the show. What's that? You think we deserve 5 stars? We'd love that. Don't just leave an awesome rating. Tell your friends too. We're on Apple and Spotify. Search for China Watch Epic Times. This podcast is a weekly production with new episodes every Monday evening. Support independent journalism by subscribing to the Epic Times. The CCP plays an interesting game of risk versus reward when it comes to sending students abroad. On the one side, the risk is students doing everything in their power to stay away from the regime once getting a taste of living abroad. The reward is the technology transfer done through students and workers bringing back insider knowledge to Chinese companies, which are unable to develop such things on their own. And there is a wide range of people dedicated to exposing the situation. You may have heard the name Xi Van Fleet. She's a mother in Loudoun County in Northern Virginia. She gained some notoriety during parental rights movements a few years ago. I have known her since then. She also came as a Chinese student. She grew up during the Cultural Revolution. She told me that her life's mission is uprooting the Chinese communist influence in America. That's because if America is taken by communism, she won't have anywhere else to go. Here's what she said at a webinar on May 30th.
Education is really a matter of national security. For the CCP, that is exactly what they think of education. And they need to control the mind of young people, and they need to indoctrinate them. And if these young people come to America and learn about democratic values, that will be a threat to their power.
The study abroad program for Chinese students was initiated by Deng Xiaoping before he became the second leader of the CCP. One of the many things Deng was well known for was his strategy of hiding your strength and biding your time towards the United States. In Chinese, 韬光养晦. The student exchange program neatly fell into this category, and he didn't treat it like a diplomatic exchange. He went after it like a military mission. At 3 a.m. on July 10, 1978, former President Jimmy Carter got a call from his national science advisor, who was visiting Beijing and was with Deng at the time. In Carter's recollection, Carter awoke with the panic of a national emergency on his hands, only to hear the advisor say, Deng Xiaoping insisted I call you now to see if you would permit 5,000 Chinese students to come to American universities. Carter wasn't amused, being woken up at 3 a.m. for this. He angrily replied, Tell him to send 100,000, and slammed the phone down. We'll come back to that number in a moment. Based on Deng Xiaoping's urging, the first group of 52 Chinese students left the Beijing airport for the United States on the day after Christmas in 1978. They were all vetted by the CCP as red talent. The regime sponsored their studies. They all wore the same suits, coats, shoes, and carried identical briefcases. Now, I don't know about you, the look and feel doesn't come across to me as an academic exchange. It's more like dispatching a team of Jason Bournes. Months later, when Deng visited the United States, these 52 students were invited to a reception with Deng's wife. She told them, You need to return to China after your studies. If you don't, Comrade Xiaoping will be anxious. And for those of you who didn't grow up in China, those seemingly caring and pleading words are actually more like the mafia offering someone protection. Nothing more than a thinly veiled threat. This clearly wasn't about battering the lives of Chinese people, but using the United States' openness against itself. And to emphasize that this was really more of a military operation than an educational experience, Deng famously said that he wasn't worried about any of the Chinese students defecting to the United States. Even if 10% or 20% betray the CCP, said Deng, there are still 80% left. Within 5 years, it wasn't 5,000 Chinese students in America. It was 100,000, just as Carter's outburst allowed. Now, the count is about 277,000 Chinese students. 1 in every 4 international students in the United States comes from China. Those numbers kept rising for several reasons. First, the children of CCP elites and scholars sponsored by the CCP. In the 1980s, as a result of more exchanges between Americans and Chinese, a minority group of Chinese students came to the United States with the help of Americans. Xi Van Fleet is one of them. After the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre, Congress passed the Chinese Student Protection Act of 1992 to allow Chinese nationals who were in the United States legally to obtain a green card. Many Chinese stayed thanks to that bill. I personally came over in the 1990s. It was so easy to come to the States then. Half of my undergraduate class at Tsinghua University, yes, a STEM major, came for graduate studies. If I didn't switch my major to business, I could be a semiconductor engineer now. What a shame that would be, because you likely wouldn't get to hear me putting on this show. After China joined the World Trade Organization under the Clinton administration, a new elite group emerged. They made a lot of money and sent their children to America. But that was sort of a cut-off line. Van Fleet describes how the CCP has changed its internal brainwashing techniques before allowing students abroad.
Among the Chinese, we have a saying that the older generation of Chinese students mostly love America. But this new brand of Chinese students, they were taught to hate America. They were taught to believe that the East is rising and the West is declining. And it is the destiny of China to replace America. So a lot of them came here, and especially those government sponsored. They came here almost with the goal to help their so-called motherland, and which is really to help the CCP.
So, combining Deng's pragmatic view on some percentage of people defecting, on top of having such a large number of people coming over, is actually a manifestation of Mao Zedong's People's War. That's according to Alex Liao, who grew up in China's military system and later became a journalist in Hong Kong, London, and then Washington. Let me give you the theoretical example of how this People's War is employed before going to more concrete evidence. According to Alex, different countries take different approaches to building their intelligence forces. Russians spend 10 years training a super spy who assimilates into American society seamlessly. Now, that wouldn't be possible for the Chinese because they will always look different. The CIA finds a genius to train for 10 months and then deploys. And the CCP sends hundreds of people to get the job done, without concern for losses. We've all joked about the saying, China has too many people, right? That's a stratagem as well.
So we have a lot of those people that some government sponsored, they are tasked to do certain things, including spying. And there are others, they just want to. They want to. And there are still others, they are pressured because they have family in China. And so there's just all sorts of people. How do we know who's who? We don't. We absolutely do not know who is doing what and who's real spy, who's not.
For example, Alex shared that among his generation of STEM college students in the 1980s, about 1 out of 4 who studied in America had prior contact with the CCP's national security staff before leaving China. The national security personnel would offer to help these students, whether it's to forge a fake recommendation letter, change grades, or falsify a thesis so the student could secure scholarships. Remember, all the college student profiles are CCP's properties. Some students would even obtain financial help from the CCP if they were too poor. When they get to America, they don't have to do anything in particular. Just study and find a job to stay. The unspoken protocol, according to Alex, is that after 20 years, when the party needs you, it will find you, and you will know what to do. Think Fox Hunt, a CCP program targeting Chinese dissidents in the United States to force them to go back to China, quote-unquote, voluntarily. That's the typical Chinese military strategy. I feed an army for 1,000 days to be able to use it for one critical moment. In Chinese, that's 养兵千日，用兵一时. And keep in mind, the majority of Chinese currently in the United States came as students at one point. Here's Professor Owen again, talking about his experience in Silicon Valley a few weeks ago, a hotspot for Chinese students and graduates.
I was just in Santa Clara, California, visiting the headquarters of NVIDIA, and I stayed at a hotel, and there were many, many Chinese people there, and I got at the hotel, and I got an email, follow-up email from the hotel, how was your stay? And the first language in the email was Chinese, not English. And so there was many Chinese people kind of cycle through Silicon Valley, and Chinese nationals have been integral to the great progress that Silicon Valley has made, the innovation, right? So it's mostly a very good story, but inevitably there are questions about espionage, and so I take that seriously, but I don't know the scale.
Dr. John Lenczowski is founder and president of the Institute of World Politics, a graduate school for national security and foreign policy. He's also a former senior official in President Reagan's National Security Council. At the webinar on May 30th, he reviewed what he knew.
One of our graduates, who's one of the most highly decorated intelligence officers defending the Defense Department equities in California, stationed in Silicon Valley, has testified that there's something like 25,000 Chinese intelligence collectors in Silicon Valley alone.
25,000 agents? That sounds like a pretty effective people's war being executed to me. So what can be done about it? That all comes back to Rubio's statements at the beginning about cutting off students with CCP ties or those who study in critical fields. Even decades ago, Alex heard in private conversations with some think tankers in Washington that the only way to truly stop the Chinese IP theft and espionage was to stop Chinese students from entering the United States. Otherwise, the enforcement would be too nuanced to be effective. For example, a Chinese student would come to study business and then switch to a STEM major. No one thought the potentially extreme solution would ever be adopted until now. I know I still owe you an explanation of how I reach clarity with my own emotional reactions to the news. Stay with us. Follow the show, rate us 5 stars. We're on Apple and Spotify. Search for China Watch Epic Times. This podcast is a weekly production with new episodes every Monday evening. Support independent journalism by subscribing to the Epic Times. Share your thoughts with me. Leave a review. Tell me how you think we're doing. 2 days after Rubio's announcement, we knew that the U.S. China trade talks had been stalled. Based on my discussions with Alex, Professor Owen, and other American professors who wish to remain anonymous, no one believes this change is just about trade talks. The consensus is that the United States has taken another step towards a Cold War-style relationship. This is about full-spectrum disengagement and competition. The new visa policy is somewhat ambiguous. So the first disengagement is with critical fields. While Rubio never explicitly said what those fields are, the general consensus is that they include STEM disciplines, semiconductors, quantum computing, and AI-related technology. But what's the next disengagement? How will the U.S. government quantify the connections to the Chinese Communist Party? War hinges on secrecy and deception, so we can only watch and see. Meanwhile, the new policy is affecting the lives of many people. One anonymous professor told me that his longtime collaborator was due to begin a year's visit from China in August. Now the trip is uncertain. His Chinese students in the undergraduate school and the PhD program are similarly uncertain. And thus, his research agenda will also be uncertain. This professor prefers to remain anonymous due to the potential implications for the university and its wallet. Chinese students make up a significant portion of the student body at his university. Incidentally, he doesn't teach in a STEM field. So think back to the Chinese Exclusion Act. That prohibition ended in practice in the 1960s. Alex said Chinese people in the United States are worried about that. After all, back then, the Qing dynasty and the United States were not enemies or competitors. There was no hostility between the two nations. The Exclusion Act was just a conflict between the labor union in America and Chinese laborers who took jobs from Americans and sent money back to China. Now, the impact could be the additive impact of Chinese hollowing out American communities by taking their jobs away and stealing technology. Keeping that history in mind, a potential war in Taiwan wouldn't help either. Think back to the Second World War. Japanese people in the United States were rounded up in 10 internment camps in remote and desolate locales. But times have changed, and Professor Owen thinks that's unlikely to happen again.
And I don't think we're going to go back. For one thing, intermarriage is among people of different races and ethnic groups is much, much higher than it used to be. And people encounter, the neighborhoods are more integrated. They're not fully integrated, but they're more integrated than they used to be. And so stepping back from all of that would be very, very difficult to do, even psychologically for a lot of people. So I don't think we're going back to that, these exclusion laws, but I understand the fear that of some that we might be, because this is not a move in the right direction.
He thinks the new visa policy is a political decision, not a racial decision. That's because, as I said at the beginning, this is about the Trump administration targeting the CCP, not Chinese people. If the administration announces the same restriction on Taiwanese people, then Owen said it's a racial issue and not a political one. His comment on intermarriage helped me understand my own emotions. A part of me felt torn apart because being an American is already part of me. Remember my earlier comment about making my own choices? Learning how to do that was the biggest cultural shock to me. So far, my Chinese and American identities have coexisted within me like an intermarriage. I told my German-American husband that I felt I had been standing on two boats, with one leg on each. Now, all of a sudden, the two boats are drifting away from each other. I have a new problem of keeping the balance I've been comfortable with for many years. In the near future, I'll have to reconcile the two parts in a new way. Maybe it's Chinese, as in traditional Chinese, that's independent and separate from the CCP, which is the origin of the threat to the United States, and my American identity. I don't know the answer yet, but knowing what the emotion is was helpful because I know I'll get to it. If you know the answer or have any ideas for solving my new problem, write to me at terri.wu@epictimes.com or leave me a comment in the review section. Let me end the episode on a more upbeat note. I have good news to share. Professor Deng Xiaoping, the former propaganda artist who is now an expert in many fields, including deciphering Chinese propaganda, will become a recurring guest on our show. I trust that he will also help me. I suspect that there's a small part of me that's still believing in Chinese communist propaganda. That's the reason for my current emotional imbalance in taking the news of the new visa policy. Till next time, I'm Terri Wu. Thanks for listening.